Thank you all for joining us today. I'm very excited to meet with each and every one of you and learn a bit more about the work that you do, which is amazing from what I've learned so far. Before we get started, I'll go ahead and introduce myself, and then I'm going to ask each of you to do the same. My name is Dr. Christine Umali-Kopp. I am a professor of psychology at Santiago Canyon College in Southern California. I am a cultural psychologist by training, and the kinds of things that I focus on are things like social justice, decolonization, and decentering whiteness. And whoever would like to go next, please introduce yourself.
I can go first.
Thank you, Jess.
Yeah. So I'm Jessica. I'm a designer, handloom weaver, and researcher, and I specialize in women textiles and women's apparel. And I'm very passionate about supporting the creation of textiles that have a positive impact on people and the planet. At the moment, I'm currently exploring and working on projects that involve circular design and creating regenerative textiles for fashion and interiors. And I decided to start Damgo Studio to become a platform to share my research and the process behind creating handmade textiles from the fiber to the finished product, using natural materials from the Philippines as well. And at the moment, I'm also working as Anthill's Chief Sustainability and Innovation Officer.
Great.
That's it.
Thank you.
I can go next.
Thanks, Anya.
All right, my name is Anya Lim. I am the co-founder, managing and creative director of Anthill Fabric Gallery. Anthill is alternative nest and training hub for Indigenous or ingenious little livelihood seekers. Super long, but we are a social and a cultural enterprise based in Cebu, Philippines. And we work to provide sustainable livelihood to different Indigenous and artisan communities around the country. So basically, the core of our work is focused on capacity building through our enterprise development program, where we support these artisan communities to become successful entrepreneurs so that one day they can become self-reliant and successful in the way they do their work.
Great, thank you. Either Caroline or Carol?
You want to go ahead, Carol?
Okay, I'm Carol De Leon. I was born in the Philippines, but raised in the United States. And I've worked in the fashion industry basically my whole life, doing big productions in China or in Italy or in Los Angeles. And I have recently moved to Manila to pursue slow fashion and sustainability and ethical sourcing. I've started my line called Angkan, which is dedicated to all products made in the Philippines. And I am also a consultant for DTI and a consultant for the Design Center Philippines. And I'm hoping to bring a new breath of life to design on an international level for Made in the Philippines products, so that we can compete in the mainstream market and in the international market. I'm working with different Indigenous communities and different MSMEs, and as a consultant to DTI, I have a lot of access to all of these different magnificent artists all over the Philippines. And I'm still in kind of a discovery mode of discovering all of the talents in the Philippines, and also putting together a small bazaar or pop-up show in Poblacion called Mercatino Pop-Up, and we're featuring some of these new entrepreneurs that have actually come out of COVID. They're going to their creative roots and creative passions now because of the situation. And I think it's a great opportunity to maximize the potential of the Made in Philippines and artisanal kind of products, especially during these times of awareness of ethical production. And that's me, and I'm located now in Manila.
Thank you. Caroline.
My name is Caroline Mangosing, and I am the founder and creative director of Vinta Gallery. So my company does modern Filipiniana, ready to wear and custom. So I do bridal couture. And we're direct to consumer, so it's online, and everything is produced in-house in my atelier in Parañaque, and everything gets shipped to Canada, and then I ship to the world from here. My I was born in the Philippines, just quickly. Moved to Los Angeles when I was 10, and then we moved to Canada when I was 16. And I've been here ever since. I mostly grew up on the West Coast, but I moved to Toronto in 2001. And I spent actually the first couple of years here producing film and television with Filipino content. And then I moved on to a Filipino arts and cultural organization that I was the founder and executive director of for like 10 years, 8 years, 10 because it was 2 years of volunteer. And from there, that's where Vinta was born, because people always called cultural center, do you have barong and Filipino costume? So I was yielding a lot of those kind of calls, and I thought, you know what? I did go to fashion school and I abandoned it when I was 19, so maybe I can go back to that. So Vinta was born as a social enterprise within Kapisanan, which is a charitable organization. And then I moved on from Kapisanan and I took Vinta with me. So that's where I am at.
Thank you so much for each taking a moment to just let us get to know you a little bit more in the work that you do. So I'm thinking let's just dive in and talk and learn more about how you came to be at the platform that you have now. I know just from you sharing and learning a little bit about each of you that you all have your beginnings in the Philippines, and then your journeys took you in different directions, right? Some of you stayed in the Philippines, some of you are now immigrated to other countries, some have returned to the Philippines, right? And then others have spent time outside of the Philippines as well. Out of curiosity, how did you finally come to your current focus, either like returning to your Filipinx roots or Filipino roots, or the focus on working with artisans and indigenous communities? How did you come to that place of deciding that's where you wanted to focus your work?
I can go first.
Thank you.
So it says my internet connection is unstable. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think our anthill origin story really started when I was young. I've been very, very blessed to have parents who are very nationalistic, and they consciously brought us up to really have such great love for country, and that's, I guess, where my social and cultural awakening started very early on. My mom's bedtime stories were about these different indigenous communities that she used to visit as a volunteer when she was in school and college. So when we established Anthill, there was a huge sense of clarity in terms of our focus in working with different indigenous communities. My mom and I have traveled around the country and immersed ourselves in these different communities, and really kind of invested in time and effort to build relationships and gain trust with these communities. And it was just very clear in every visit that there was really a strong sense of there's a poverty of identity among the younger generation of women who are not kind of enticed to learn the craft. It's not relevant to learn the skill. There's no demand for the fabrics. It's hard to kind of access. There was no fairs or any bazaars back then, 10 years ago. So there's a huge gap in cultural continuity, and a lot of these elder weavers also don't see the sense of passing on a legacy or passing on this very important craft to the younger generation. So given these issues, given these gaps, given these challenges, it was very clear to us that this is what we want to work on. We wanted the women and the artisans to really realize the value of their skill, their talent, realize their full potential, and realize why it's very important for us to preserve our cultural identity through our heart woven cloth, which our ancestors considered our second skin. So the work really was focused on that. However, Anthill, at the forefront, you see Anthill as a fashion brand. We have a lot of clothes and non-apparel, accessories, etc. But the core of our work, and the focus of our work, is really capacity building. It's really entrepreneurship development. It's really community enterprise development. Because we believe that social entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship really is what will propel the community artisans to be successful and to thrive in preserving their talent, and also being able to ensure that the traditions are passed on and are sustained from generations to generations. Hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I know that connects to some of the work that others are doing too. So whoever would like to chime in as well, like how did you, again, come to the focus that you have now, either, uplifting Filipino culture in some way, working with Indigenous communities? How did you come to that place?
Okay, I'll go next. I have been working in the United States as a designer for different brands and also my own brand. I've worked with companies like Forever 21, which is a really big fashion company that is fast fashion. And I also work with high-end companies in Italy. And I realized in my career that after a while, it was all about profits. There's creativity, which I loved. And it was definitely when you're working as a business, especially with big corporations, it's about profits. You're churning out product, and if you have a bestseller, you're as a designer, you're dependent on to produce the same bestseller and beat your sales record from the past in the different stores like Nordstrom's, Macy's, Bloomingdale's, Revolve, all kinds of different retail stores. And in working with China, where the production has all gone now, I started to discover my roots in the Philippines, because you have a little bit of downtime when you submit your designs. You have like 4 or 5 days until prototypes get made. So instead of sitting in China, I would take a trip to Manila and just try to rediscover the land where I was born. We immigrated from the Philippines when I was about 4 years old. So I had to rediscover this. And I did this for several years. And then after a while, I decided that I was going to make a career change and make a life change and move to the Philippines. So this is what I'm doing now. And I think that it's really important to, I think my perspective is really important, because I'm very, very passionate in that I have worked outside of the Philippines and have achieved the certain sales like many small companies or new designers would like to have in America and in Europe. And I would like to be in the Philippines to be this cheerleader for everybody here, and try to instill this in small companies, startups, or just Filipino companies, that we can have our own Filipino brands. Here a lot of the brands are licensed or imported in. I feel we can create our own Filipino brands made in the Philippines and for the local market, and also export it. I think that I feel very much that the Filipinos have always kind of wanted the things that are imported, that somehow that's better. I really feel that there's an appreciation that Filipinos themselves don't understand. And I think it's now coming to be that with the slow fashion and everything else, that people within the Philippines are appreciating, you know, our own handwork. And I think that I would love to. I know that the market in Europe and the market in America would really like this now. Also with just the trends in fashion going towards slow fashion. So I think this is a great time to maximize on this with the Angkan brand and the consultation that I do with DTI and Design Center Philippines.
And
Okay, I guess
yeah,
it's my turn.
please.
What was the question again?
Sure. Basically, how did you come to focus, like either returning to your Filipino roots, if you see it that way, or really focusing on bringing attention to just Philippine-made products, like you have with Vinta, kind of, or even kind of reinventing the wheel, right? Modernizing what has been very traditional in Filipino culture. So how did you come to that focus of going back to those roots, and even looking at indigenous textiles, like you said, previously with Ifugao textiles? How did you return to that place and come to that space?
Well, for me, my journey kind of promoting and working within the Filipino culture has been 20 years already. So it started in college, where I had stopped speaking Filipino because I was really ashamed. You know, as an immigrant, I was made fun of. I had an accent when we first moved to the States and that kind of thing. So going to college, taking, you know, feminist studies and reading Angela Davis and, you know, Audre Lorde and all that kind of stuff kind of was like, oh, well, I'm not Black, but this is speaking to me and my experience as an immigrant in Canada. So when I moved to Toronto, I moved because I found out that 50% of all the Filipinos in Canada live in Toronto. So I moved here chasing after my people, you know? So, and I found my life partner, and he's a filmmaker. So we ended up making films and some television together. And so it just kind of started from there, like in 2001, basically. And going through and founding a Filipino Arts and Cultural Center. We were doing a lot of the stuff that Anthill was doing for Filipino creatives. So young Filipino creatives, we had these entrepreneurship kind of programs, so that, because a lot of Filipino parents don't encourage their kids to be creative. And so many Filipinos are so creative and are the best at what they do, you know, and there's just kind of this hopelessness, like, no, I have to do something else. I have to work for the government and be an accountant, or, you know, that kind of thing. So we kind of created programming, and, you know, Vinta was gonna kind of help with that kind of programming, but, you know, with nonprofits, we lost a bunch of funding and we had to pivot, and I had to take Vinta out of there. And so in the way that I work within Vinta as a for-profit company now, but it's we have ethical values. So I pay my workers sustainable living wages in the Philippines. And, you know, I want to eventually do what Anthill is doing. But, you know, like, my focus right now is just like, let me just become a sustainable company and make it so that we're paying for everything through our revenue and not just through my investor, you know, because that's going to run out at some point. So, and the way that I came to, I wasn't doing any using indigenous textile at all until I met Charisse, and it was like the price point was still too high for me as a startup to offer that. And then I found this stuff in Divisoria. And so I was like, okay, well, this is Ifugao stuff. And, you know, as a elementary school kid in the Philippines, that was the only indigenous culture that I knew about. You know what I mean? I don't know what it is, but the Ifugaos had their mainstay in Manila. Like, being educated in Manila, it was like the only tribe I knew was the Ifugao tribe, because I guess Manileños go to Baguio for summer vacation and we go to the rice terraces. So that was the only um, exposure I had to indigenous culture. So I guess, you know, many years later being here and doing fashion, I was like, oh, I wanna use that because I have a kind of attachment to it. Like it's nostalgic, it's part of my childhood, it's part of the Filipino-ness that I knew that, you know, wasn't something that I had to find in a book. It was something that I experienced as a child being in the Philippines. So that's my kind of connection to it. And it's kind of trying to navigate what's right for the company and what is affordable for the company at this stage, and kind of finding the right people to work with in the Philippines is still a big challenge, because it's like I just go to Manila. My parents moved back there when I was in college, so that's I had a kind of a place to go. But now that I have my own atelier in a house in Parañaque, it's still like I can't go all over the Philippines while I'm there, because I'm just like hitting it hard, just trying to produce prototypes before I come back to Canada, right? So
Right.
it's like I don't have the luxury of going to the communities and having the immersion and kind of meeting all the right people. So I think it's like it's part of my dream to be able to go directly to Ifugao and meet people and meet the weavers and that kind of thing. But at this stage in the company, I'm not there yet. But thank God for the internet. I was able to meet so many people, amazing people, just through Facebook, their Facebook pages and that kind of thing. So that's where I'm at in terms of my connection to indigenous communities and sourcing.
Great. I know I want to touch on some of the things that you mentioned too, but before we go there, I know Jess hasn't had a chance to chime in, so I didn't know if you wanted to chime in. Again, the question was, how did you find yourself coming to this focus of, you know, really focus on Filipino roots, working with indigenous communities or textiles? I know you said you loom also, so how did you get to that place?
So interestingly, though I was born here and lived here for most of my life, I didn't really know a lot about indigenous Philippine textiles until I was sort of introduced to a project by a Japanese colleague who wanted a collection done and featured in Japan that featured Philippine textiles. So before that, I didn't really even know. So it's interesting because you'd think that we would learn it in school, but we don't really know a lot about these communities and the culture that we have, which I think is a problem. But then the first opportunity that I had to actually sort of meet the community here in Cebu, because there is a handloom weaving community here, and they were the first community that I worked with. And when I saw how they were making the fabric, I was amazed, because being in fashion school, you obviously have no idea how a lot of these fabrics are made. They show you factories that make tons of fabric, and then you don't really sort of comprehend the process entirely. And that was just sort of eye-opening for me. And I think that's when I fell in love with weaving altogether. And then after that, I got an opportunity to work for Anthill, which was really amazing. I was there for, I think, almost 3 years, and Anya really gave me the chance to sort of explore weaving and sort of seeing what I could do in that space. And eventually I decided I wanted to take classes. So I've taken a few classes on weaving already, and I bought my own hand loom. So I have a loom at home. So I'm all out weaver at this point. And it was really just sort of that interaction with the community and seeing how they do it that sort of inspired me to do it as well. And the other thing that I'm focusing on now is really trying to understand how we can use local materials in the Philippines to create textiles. So I finished my master's, and my dissertation was all about the concept of enabling regional textile communities in the Philippines that can produce from farm to final textile. And the Philippine Textile Research Institute has been working on that project as well, in their own way, I think in Iloilo. And what I'm trying to understand is, or the reason why I felt it was necessary to also be in the Philippines, is to find ways to actually enable that and grow that. Because at the moment, a lot of the yarn that we use is imported. We use yarn from, I don't know, from China probably. A lot of it's polyester. We have fibers in the Philippines that we don't take advantage of. And it has a lot to do with investment and people wanting to be in that industry in the first place. And it's a really complicated process. You can read my dissertation if you'd like, because it's all in there. But it's, yeah, so I'm hoping and that my work here and working with Anthill will also help me sort of pursue that and make it a possibility in the future to create entirely local textiles from the fiber to the finished product. So, yeah.
I would like to read your dissertation.
I'd love to send it to you, yeah.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I would like to read it also, but I won't get too distracted. I think, one of the themes that I'm just feeling again, hearing from each of you, because I did a little bit of research about everybody, is this concept of social justice and maybe it's because it's my background. It's about like leveling the playing field, elevating Philippine artisanal products, elevating the culture, creating awareness, creating opportunities for communities in the Philippines to not only bring to the surface or spotlight their work and their ability to make these wonderful products, whether it's something that's hand loomed or whether it's something that's created just from Philippine made products. And the other piece, I guess I'm thinking, and Caroline, you sharing about, talking about your atelier and what have you. And then also the focuses that each of you, Jasanya and Carol, are talking about working with communities in the Philippines as well. How do you negotiate? I think one thing, Caroline, you said, we have to make sure that the company's sustainable, right? And just knowing some pieces that I'm familiar with in Filipino culture, in the Philippines, that there's a whole issue of classism too, yes? That there's some communities that are very poverty stricken, there's communities that are very affluent, and all those in between. How do you look into just the social responsibility of, like you said, fair wages for people who are making products there that your company is elevating? How do you make sure that they're treated ethically, that it's really elevating the community and the work and the individuals that are making these products with their hands? How do you kind of negotiate that and deal with that, of the treatment of workers, sustainable wages, and then still try to make a profit and do good work?
I was just talking about this with my operations manager, and it's like I have to battle my guilt constantly, being the North American. I'm like the balikbayan boss. And I'm really lucky that my operations and production manager in the Philippines is also a woman, and she's been working in factories for, I don't know, 20 years. She worked in China, she worked in Vietnam, and then she was in the Philippines, and I caught her, after coming off another factory job in Cavite or Laguna, and she's amazing. And it's like, between her and I, it's like, okay, you should pay them more. And they're like, no, 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 no. And she would be the one to be like, you know what, this is already the legal wage and you're already giving them more. So let's just start there. And she would kind of, like assuage my guilt a little bit. So we kind of go back and forth that way. And then, we kind of look at all of the people that she's hired and do the progress kind of report that way. And it's like, how are they doing? Like, I want to give them a raise only if they want to learn more. Like, I really want them to learn more and not just be a sewer. Like, if they're interested in pattern making, push them to learn more. And then, and it's like, for me, it's like the sustainability of the talent and not just, their livelihood and that kind of thing. So, and then there's a disconnect with the consumer, where we're still trying to teach the North American consumer, who are still, buying at Forever 21 and buying at H&M, where it's like $19.99. It's like, why am I going to buy that lace blouse, yeah, it has Filipino sleeves, but it's $250 when I can buy that at H&M for $40, right? And it's like, okay, your sisters, your manangs in the Philippines are making this, and they're putting their kids through college, you know? So it's like, you can't be so removed from the product that you're purchasing and just like only focusing on the price. And, you know, it's like, this is supposed to be heirloom quality, right? So it's like, you buy it, you hand it down to your daughter, to your niece, to your sister, you know, like you keep it in a box, and then you wear it. And then, you know, you think about who made it for you, and those kind of things. So it's a balance of getting over my shit, you know, getting over my guilt of being privileged and coming back to the Philippines and doing this kind of work, and really being kind of, every time I'm there, it's like people, you know, partially people think I'm white, because I'm slightly mestiza and my hair is fake blonde, um, and then you know, like my sewers are like, you know, surprised that I'm cleaning the toilet, you know, like things like that. And it's like, you guys, who do you think cleans my toilet in Canada? It's me. I do it, you know? So I'm just trying to get work done here and make sure that everybody's paid for and taken care of, and, you know, and that kind of thing. So, and I think that because I show that, you know, even through this pandemic, they were able to quarantine in the house and keep working. And I said, you either go home or you stay there and you work. And, you know, it's a comfortable 3-bedroom suburban house in Parañaque. So I was able to kind of give them the choice of being able to work through the pandemic and be safe and continue production. And luckily people in North America were still shopping. So it's really a very tenuous balance all the time, all the time.
That's what it sounds like. And I just had, like how you just said, the guilt that I have to deal with, right? I'm sure you're not alone in that. I have to believe. And I think especially as Filipinas, you know, I think it's challenging for us to sometimes acknowledge our own worth and to find value in also doing good work, but also making a good living, something that will sustain our lives too. And I think as Filipinas, we don't always talk about that piece, but I know a lot of Filipinas in my life, myself included, feel that guilt, maybe not in the same industry, right? But just that guilt. So I appreciate you sharing that really candidly. And I wanted to check in with the rest of the panel too, to see, you know, that piece that Caroline is talking about. How do you want to talk about how you negotiate that balance too, Anya?
Yeah, I'll pick up from what Caroline shared, and it's so humbling to hear that from you, Caroline. That guilt is actually so strong, even at the grassroots level, even among Indigenous artisans. They also experience that, they also feel that, and that is why when you go to the community and you ask them, Nanay, ate, magkano po, how much is like a meter of textile? Or how much is this brass bracelet? By default, they would say, it's up to you, ma'am, kayo na po bahala. Because that perception of self-worth, you know, how they perceive themselves, how they lack that how they undervalue their own skill and their own self-worth is still also so strong, even among the women in these communities. So in the topic of social justice, I think, you know, the work of Caroline and Vinta, starting with ensuring that they're providing fair wages, is already such a huge milestone, a huge kind of accomplishment, because as she said, it's really not easy kind of navigating around you know, this balancing act of, you know, ensuring that your work is sustainable, your business is sustainable, at the same time you're also providing positive impact to your team or to the communities you work with. But the way we kind of work on it in Anthill is really look at cultural, economic, and environmental. Like we really try to work on being able to be holistic in our approach, but we didn't get here overnight, you know, like it took us a long while to also work on what we have achieved through the years. But everything is really anchored on sustainability. So when we talk about social justice, I think the foundation of how we're able to achieve that still really lies strongly on our advocacy on entrepreneurship. It's very important for us that our partner artisans gain an entrepreneurial mindset, so they're able to actually see the value of their talent and their craft, their products and services. So when you go to the communities, the biggest gap in terms of labor or wages or being able to evaluate their work as designers, as artisans, is not knowing how to properly cost their products and services, right? And that's like an entrepreneur's problem, right? How do you properly cost your products and services in a way where you can actually sustain your business, or where you can actually have a good quality of life? And this is something that they don't know how to do, you know. There's a lot of really sad stories about how they undervalue their prices, they undervalue their products and services, and price them so cheap, for lack of a better term. And that's why they're not able to see the potential of their work. So also, like a lot of these artisans are drowning in debt, are not able to have any access to proper health care, to good education, etc. So to us, I think when we talked about when we the way we kind of address social justice is really ensuring that we're able to create platforms or an enabling environment where our artisans are able to access that. And it starts with education. So we come to a community, and instead of doing like a needs assessment and asking them, you know, what they need, what are their problems, we employ a tool where we do an assets assessment, so we can shift the narrative. And that change in language is so powerful. So then we ask them, you know, what are your dreams? What are your goals? What do you want to achieve? And that's just entirely changing how the conversation flows. And so they talk about how they want to have a house, they want to be able to send their kids to school, they want to be able to go to Hong Kong and have a vacation there. And they start to discover what they're good at. They start to discover the value of their talents. And from there, they're able to understand that, okay, for me to be able to achieve my dreams, I have to take that into consideration when I price my fabrics, when I price my services. It's empowering, it's heart opening in the sense that they realize, oh, okay, I'm able to make this by hand, and people who visit me find it so amazing, find it wicked. I'm a designer myself. I'm an artisan myself. And with that, they learn to assert themselves more in terms of, like, you know, how much they should be paid and how much their fabrics are worth. So I think that influences how they perceive what they deserve, and also changes their quality of life. And the way you navigate around that is really through dialogue, through constant conversation, through really engaging in discourse that allows them to ask questions, allows artisans to really understand, like, you know, what goes into the value chain, but also engaging also the Filipino community, customers, the diaspora community in what goes around the process of being able to run enterprises and sustain livelihood.
Thank you for that. I mean, there was so much that I really appreciated what you shared. As a cultural psychologist, I love the fact that you go into the community and say, okay, what do you want? What do you need? What are you dreaming for? What goal do you want to attain? Because at the same, in that dialogue that you said that's so critical, it really humanizes who that worker is, right? That artisan that's making this
Mm.
product. Now you see them as a whole person, not just as someone who gives you product and makes things. And it becomes like, I loved how you said earlier, like they're your partners, right? So
Yeah, and
partners
when
with,
and in that conversation, you kind of pass on the mic to them, and they learn to kind of honor their voice and realize that, okay, this is about me. This is about me being able to let my story shine.
yeah, that's beautiful. I just love that so much. Oh, just, I saw your head kind of bobbing up and down a bit. I didn't know if you wanted to chime in there.
Well, obviously, I've worked with all the communities that Anya's talking about, so I know what it means. And I guess from my perspective as a designer, I think my interaction with the community had a lot to do with helping them realize what their capacities were as an artist themselves, as a designer themselves. And I had some sessions with them where we would sort of design products or ideas, or give them the chance to sit down and actually think about it. Because a lot of the time when designers come into communities, what they do is they tell them, could you make this for me? And this is what I want to achieve. But then a lot of the time they don't get the chance to actually like decide for themselves. And they're also afraid to make things themselves because they're like, if I make this, what if nobody wants to buy it? So there's that fear that, you know, that they'd lose money on something, or it's like they don't believe in their ability to do it themselves. And now, so we had sessions with them to sort of help them sort of test their creativity and sort of explore that a bit. And now there are weavers, at least in Argao with the community that I worked with, that are very confident in coming up with their own designs and actually telling the other weavers, giving them ideas about what they can make. So now they don't have to call anybody and say, is this right? Does this look good? No, they feel confident that they can do it themselves. And I think it's just about being there and giving them the chance to actually explore that and sort of, you know, like sort of feel confident that they can do it, or give them the encouragement that they can, because sometimes I don't think that a lot of the time they get it from other people. So yeah.
I'm just seeing a connection now with what we touched upon, that Caroline, you brought up of, that guilt and then the sustainability. It's really like understanding our value as Filipinas. And it sounds like some of the individuals, the artisans you're working with, it's them understanding their value too, right? That no
Mm.
one would want to buy that I'm making. What if no one wants it? What if no one likes it? And so the same maybe issues that Filipino entrepreneurs are dealing with internally, that a lot of those artisans in the Philippines are also having to negotiate that internally too. I wanted to draw that connection because I felt it as you were talking, Jess. And I know, Carol, you haven't had a chance to chime in there, so I didn't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, I'm just listening to what everyone is saying, and I think across the board, everyone here is doing something for the community. There's rights, there's wrongs, and we can't always hit it all the time.
Right.
We make mistakes, but I have to say, on a macro scale, talking about textiles first and foremost, because I think it's the most important thing that actually is connected to our culture. And something that really deeply bothers me is, growing up in LA, and, my next culture would be Italy, because I've, lived in Italy. I speak fluent Italian, and I've worked with Italian manufacturers and sourcing for most of my life. In the world out there, nobody knows what Philippine textiles look like. It bothers me. Okay. Maybe a barong and sort of that sheer material, maybe the world knows it's piña or whatever. And I think, like, on a macro scale, Philippine textiles, as like before we manipulate it, before young blood like Jess gets up in there and makes it all beautiful and does different things to it to make it more modern, even the traditional textiles that we've had for thousands of years, the tinalak, the different thing, it's not known. Even our own Filipino people. Christine, if I showed you a bunch of different swatches from all over the world, I don't know if you'd be able to pick out the ones that are made in. Yeah. So that's one thing, you know. So it's like, I know growing up in LA or wherever, I would probably know that and be able to differentiate, you know, African from Mexican, from Japanese to Chinese, at least those four. But if you gave, I had no idea really. So I mean, and now that I'm here, and I was also super blessed that I got hooked up with DTI, and I was, you know, hired as a consultant and creative director for one of the projects, was working with 13 indigenous communities. And they said, well, you know, you're going to have to backpack maybe and like go visit these. I was like, oh, you know, like, wow, what a blessing, you know. And then you go as DTI. So like they hook everything up for you, and they're connected, you know, in every region that I was going to. So, I mean, the textiles are so important before we get into the silhouettes of the designs and before we get into the managing your business, because managing your business, no matter what nationality you are, what country you're in, or what fabrics, you have to be sustainable in the way that your business has to earn. But I'm saying in general, across the board, we're all touching on Philippine textiles. And one issue is they're not identifiable in the globe. And I think that we should get it out there. And you know what? They are expensive, but they're actually not expensive, because especially now with sustainability and slow fashion and authenticity having to be essential in the products that you buy now, whether it's going to sell or not. I mean, these are hard times, you know, right now with the economy and so we're calling out, like, people have been searching for this for a while now. It's like, what's the authenticity in the products that we're buying? So I feel like there's a lot of calling out for that now. I feel it's a good time. And I think like we need to first and foremost understand the value of our textiles. We need to communicate that to the makers. And then as a business, we're going to price it the way it needs to be priced. And then you have to do your due diligence in the marketing of that. So you just don't put the product out there. You do your research. You see exactly who made it, what community, what is their history, and put that all in your marketing when you sell that top for $350 US. And then you have to attract those customers that have that value. And then you have to like not be attached to the ones that don't want to buy it. Those are not your customers. Forget about those people. You know what I mean? And so I think like that's the sad part, is recognizing that our people here, our makers here are not automatically proud of what they do. You know, when I was given the opportunity to be that creative director for Salin, this project with Design Center Philippines, and I had the first meeting with 13 indigenous communities. The government has now some funding for that, and they flew them in to, you know, they flew the indigenous leaders, like cultural masters, we call them, to Manila. And I had to, you know, we had a big meeting with them, and we asked, does anybody have any questions? And one cultural master from, I can't remember which tribe it was, she raised her hand and she said, but how we don't have any machines, how are we going to compete with China? That was a question she had. Okay, so I stood up to her and I said, we're not competing with China at all. This is not about that. This is not about that. This is about the value of your human hands and your culture and what you do. I know you know, they're like kind of embarrassed, like, well, ma'am, we don't have this, we don't have that. And it's like, you have to go back there and you have to tell them that they're, you know, they're not aware of these things. And it's our job to let them know what their value is and have them appreciate what they do. Because most, you know, from what I understand, you know, a lot of these indigenous communities, you know, their children, you know, their biggest dream is to go to Manila and work at a call center. And we need to reverse that. We need to reverse that. And as entrepreneurs, sometimes, you know, we have to make investments. I made a big life change. To be able to live here and work here. And, you know, I can't go into the nitty gritty with every single company I work with. So like when I met with Anthill, the first thing I was thinking was, well, you know, I know where my indigenous fabrics come from. I've met with the tribes, you know, what is the benefit for me to work with Anthill? And then when Anya told me, look, this is what we do, and it was so much more than, can you get me that swatch in the beige and the blue? You know, it was much more than that. And I was like, oh, that's what you do. Well, now I know. I don't have to think about the guilt. I don't have to think about, is everybody eating? Is everybody okay? I don't have to think about that. I'm just going to work with Anthill because that is their advocacy to make sure that these communities are doing well, not just on a production level, but as a community, you know? So that's one of the ways that you could, as a business person, you know, feel good about what you're doing. But of course, you know, when I work with my people, I just figure, you know, I have to be consistent. Whether my sales are high or my sales are low, I'm going to consistently give them this amount of work, and the burden kind of, I'll take the burden on, am I selling it or not selling it? You know, that's going to be on me, but I have to give them some sort of consistency to make sure that they're okay. Like whether it's as little as 12 items a week, you know, that I need from that one weaver, you know, whether sales are high or low, I promise that, and I will give her that, you know. So it's kind of like not the nitty gritty of, is it 50 pesos more, 50 pesos less, you know? So in general, the fabrics, I think we need to get our fabrics out there. And then as people in the middle right now, like we need to communicate the story, the history to the people that are buying it. That's going to be in our marketing, you know, and then, and to the backward flow of that into production is like continue to inspire our weavers. And so every time like I have like a, you know, something, one of my items that are from weavers or whatever gets around the world. My daughter lives in Europe. She's between London and Florence, Italy. Every time she has something on, I let the weaver see it, and there's a certain sense of pride. I go, look what you made out there. It's in Italy, and you know, we have to be cheerleaders for them because they honestly don't have it in them right now. They're not sure of what they do, like if they're doing something that is valuable because they've been taught something else. Like all of these little weavers or small community, they have TV, and the TV right there is telling them that they need other things that they don't have. So that's what they yearn for. So if we can consistently tell them, and well, besides being cheerleaders for the culture and everything else, we have to give them work. We have to give them work because all in all, that's what they need in order to survive and stay in their communities and not aim to go work at a call center. So
you have, in hearing you talk, Mona and Carol, I just have like all these questions percolating, and I'm going, we're running out of time. So I'm going to try to get in a couple things here, because you kind of already started talking about it. And I was wondering if the other three of you relate in some piece, because as I was listening to you, Mona Carol, I was thinking, you know, you're touching upon like our identity as Filipinas, and how that plays out as entrepreneurs, your responsibility as far as sustaining your business, but also your commitment to the communities that you're working with. If you can ensure where that product is coming from, work with and partner up with people like Anthill or what have you, that are already doing that footwork for you. And then you can have that, you said less guilt, right? You can feel comfortable. So I was just wondering, because you talked about this, I was wondering if the other three of you too have any thoughts of like, what's it mean for you as a Filipina? All of you are interweaving between so many different cultural experiences and communities, right? Whether it's Canada, the States, Europe, right? The Philippines, all of you are having to negotiate that. And how do you kind of weave in and out of all these cultures and yet still be like solidly Filipina in your identity while also being this like responsible global citizen? Like, how do you, that's a big question. I know it's loaded. But I was wondering if any of you wanted to touch on that too, because that's kind of what I was feeling from you in what you just shared, Mona and Carol. So did anyone else kind of want to add to that? Like, how do you negotiate that identity and being global and interweaving through cultures?
I think we have to make a commitment. And I mean, changes, lifestyle change. I mean, for me, because this is my passion now. This is my passion now. And this is my life now. I do product development, so I can't be in LA doing product development, so I have to be here in order to do the product development with the people, with the makers. So I've had to make lifestyle changes, a big one. Hello, I moved myself here. Make a big change in order to make this happen. This is definitely fueled by passion. Each and every one of you that's here, you are by passion. We can all be working somewhere else, making more money maybe, you know what I mean? But it's on us to make this work and make the changes in our life so that it can support this passion that we have to keep this going, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I think that what people forget is when, particularly in my experience, when people are just looking at the brand from Instagram and they're not seeing the real person and what I have to do every day. Like right now I can't go back to the Philippines. I kind of want to wait for that vaccine and bring enough for my whole atelier, you know what I mean? Because I know there's going to be problems with distributing the vaccine in the Philippines. So I'm just kind of like, okay, I'm just going to sit here. And so like we're on Slack, we're on like video chat calls, and I'm doing product development that way. And it's tough, like I'm sending stuff back in a like bind box. It's going to take 2 months for them to get it. It's like, like to send corrections. It's like, I can't, it's a long process. And, there's a lot of, there's all the stuff that's happening right now. And there's a lot of, people who want to fight, there's a lot of fighting energy out there right now. And, it's so easy to kind of criticize what we do. It's like, oh, you said you were ethical and you weren't, this part isn't ethical and that part isn't ethical. And it's like, you know what? We're juggling a whole bunch of stuff right now, and we're answering to a whole bunch of people, and the glamorous kind of model that you see on Instagram is not the only reality that we're living. Like we're kind of, I have a child, he's being homeschooled right now, like I'm working from home, it's chaos. And so it's like there's so many things that are at play, and there's so many things that you're trying to, like I've talked to Anya before on email, right? Like at least like a year ago or 2 years ago, and I'm like, oh, look at all their fabrics. I was like, I can't afford it yet, because the consumer is not going to buy something that's more than $400 for a certain thing, right? So it's like I'm constantly testing my consumer. And that's our community. And when we get criticized for how we're not doing it good enough, or not ethical enough, or not, but it's like, well, you guys are the ones who are kind of gonna make the company sustainable, right? With your purchase, right? And it's like, I have to balance that and like bide my time, because like at the beginning, before the pandemic happened, I was gonna abandon marketing to the Filipino community. I was like, I'm gonna go luxury. I'm gonna go all out and just like forget the Filipinos, because if you're trying to market to Filipinos, you are not gonna get rich at this point, right? And then the pandemic happened, and I felt like, okay, this is serendipitous. I feel like, no, bitch, go back. You have to stay with your people, and it was like, it was really that kind of thing. And it really made me look at, what are we doing? What are we doing? It's like, am I gonna abandon making Filipiniana and just kind of make modern fashion with all these textiles? Or no, I have to keep making this stuff for us. So it's like, we have to be patient with each other, and we have to kind of
passion. You don't want to abandon your true passion, right?
Yeah, totally. But it's like, I have an investor who I want to kind of impress. It's constant, that kind of pull from one influence to another, to the consumer, to my employees, to my investor. And just your daily life and trying to put food on the table.
There's the logistics of it all too, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I saw Anya and Jess as Caroline and Carol had been talking. I saw the heads nodding also. So I just wanted to have some space in case you wanted to chime in there.
I think what's really been very transformative throughout this past months, being on lockdown and this pandemic, is really the power of community. So when you talk about identity, the question was around identity, or strengthening our identity as Filipinos. To be very honest, in the past years that we've connected with the diaspora community, I think I've become more Filipina now more than ever. Because I've never really been kind of opened or immersed in that kind of cultural perspective. So when we have been doing our pop-ups and connecting with a lot of design collaborators in the US and Europe, I remember when Carol and I met in this tiny cafe in LA, we were both in tears, always in tears. When we talk about always in tears, always a good form of release when we're talking about our culture and our identity. And the reason for that is I never really kind of saw the power of the fabric as something that's more than just a source of livelihood for our partner communities, and also a means to being able to preserve culture. That's always been kind of where I was coming from, being immersed in the grassroots, right? Like, Anthill is a way for us to be able to support cultural preservation and sustainable livelihood. I didn't realize how much it meant for Filipinos all over the world. I'm having goosebumps as I speak, because like last year when we did our pop-up, it was on the theme called Ugat, honoring the roots through heart woven cloth. And a lot of the conversations, Anna Marie was there in our first pop-up. Philip, they were all crying, proud we wearers were crying, and were saying that, this kapa, this binakol fabric, this is really like a cloak of healing for me. This is like a cloth of representation. This is what I'm experiencing. This is the kind of intergenerational trauma I've experienced. This is like my way of changing my narrative about my country. And I never really kind of understood that until I heard these stories and I witnessed these stories myself. And it was so powerful. It was so transformative that when we came back to the Philippines and we shared these stories to our artisan partners, they were mind blown. They were mind blown, but more than anything else, it kind of activated, it personified that connection from the weaver to the weaver. I remember DJ Cherish in New York was naturally so drawn to this fabric in that's handwoven in Argao that Jess actually co-designed with our weavers. It was like a fabric with tiny strips of edging scraps. It was a zero waste fabric. And she was just so drawn to it. And she said, I didn't even know that this fabric came from the Visayas, because that's where I'm from. She just naturally gravitated towards that fabric. And then she was sharing how, she just survived cancer and she had a huge scar here, and it was reminiscent of that design, of that fabric design, and that connection of being able to have a piece of home, have a piece of something that's coming from the motherland that also is representative of her story and her triumph and her courage. And I think to strengthen our identities as Filipinos is to be kind to ourselves. As what Carol said, every brand, every entrepreneur, each one of us has a role to play in the ecosystem. We can't do everything. We can't do it all. Caroline Vinta is amazing in design, and I think she's done a wonderful job in really promoting our signature terno, whatever fabrics she might use. And Carol has really immersed herself in the different indigenous communities, and for these communities to be able to interact with somebody who has had experience in Italy in working with these brands is such an honor and a validation for them, that actually elevates their sense of pride as well. And Jessica, now like everyone's excited to have her back again in our partner communities. And I think the potential of her research in terms of being able to come up with a farm to fiber fabric that we can all sustainably use is just so powerful, right? So I think the way for us to cultivate that is to continue conversations like this and just really have the openness to learn from each other and not judge or cancel each other just because we make mistakes, right? Like just really be in that space where we can have compassionate learning, and respect each and everyone's role to play, and learn from that. I think that's how we're able to thrive as a community, constantly collaborate and constantly just be authentic in our relationships with each other. So there.
That's awesome. Thank you,
You're
Anya.
giving me
Very
goosebumps,
well
like
said.
goosebumps, and then emotion. I feel it here also. Jess, I saw you still responding, so I didn't know if you wanted to chime in also.
I guess just to add to what Anya said, I think it's really about empathy and understanding where people are coming from, because I think, what Caroline said, on Instagram, it looks like this, but you don't know what's happening in real life. And I think even with working with the communities, it's also about empathy. It's about understanding where they're coming from, what they want, and how you as a person can communicate that to everybody else. And I guess for me, I mean, because I am German and I am Filipino, I have different cultures within me. And I think it is different because I grew up in the Philippines. So of course I connect to the Philippine culture more strongly than I do with my German culture. And when I was studying in the UK, I kind of realized the beauty of what the Philippines really had to offer, because I would sort of hear about what people were doing from different places in the world. My classmates were from India, from Thailand. So they all had different cultures as well. And I felt that when I was sharing about the Philippine culture and what we do in the Philippines, I felt extremely proud about it. And it kind of helped me sort of, it gave me an identity that could sort of set me apart from everybody else and sort of give me a direction as well. So, yeah.
Where all of you are kind of bringing the conversation is a piece that I was hoping that we'd make some time for too. And I know this is a sensitive topic. I know it can be a hurtful topic. But I think it's an important one that we touch on. There's this whole awareness around cultural appropriation and cultural exploitation. And, I've had conversations where there's generational differences across Pinais also. Some more militant, some more like old school, like, okay, where are we going with this? I see that there's been so much divisiveness within the Filipinx community, and specifically among Pinais, that's rooted in sexism and racism and colonization and colonial mentality. With all this in mind, and a lot of the important pieces that you're bringing up as far as diaspora and the need to heal and the need to have empathy and the need to communicate and to be understood as, individuals who are balancing so much because, like Carol said, because you're following your passion.
Mhm.
What would you hope to see within our community? I would say especially among Filipinas, so that we can start like building bridges of understanding instead of contributing to the division that's already there, right? We kind of inherited it on some level, right? And then we perpetuate it,
Absolutely.
whether or not we want to, because it's just what we're taught. So what would you like to see that could help build bridges instead of like putting up walls or fighting against each other? That's the best way I can kind of formulate my question.
Get therapy.
I know. More sessions like
First
this,
and
right?
foremost.
Lots of tissue.
Yeah, exactly. I think, coming from a diasporic experience, in the Philippines is a whole other ball game. I think the perspective, like with Jess and Anya, kind of seeing a different, like transformative kind of way of seeing from the other side. You know what I mean? And for us, it's like so many of the diasporic Filipinos, there's no touchstone, right? It's just kind of, it's the entry point to being Filipino and our Filipinx identity is through politics or identity politics, right? Rather than just being immersed and living in it. And so there's an insecurity there. There was a lot of like kind of cultural shame that was inherited. You know, like my parents did not, I mean, they're not ashamed of being Filipinos, but Filipinos in general have this kind of shame in general about who they are because we're colonized, right? So you carry that on. That's like a generational trauma. And to be able to tear that down,
Mm.
it's a lot of work. And I feel like because my family, like I come from like I have an abusive father. So like me, you know, having to call the cops on him and leaving home at 17, that triggered the healing to start early, you know, like at that point. So then I had to look at my identity to see why am I hating on myself? Why is my family this way? And all of like exactly what, you know, your whole study, the cultural psychology of it, right, Christine? It's like you have to look at that. And then as Americans, or I mean, Canada has kind of different identity, but you
Yes.
know, from living in the States, I understand American identity. It's it is very capitalist, and it is very like Americans are kind of like the most dreaded travelers in the world, right? Because
Yeah.
there's a sense of arrogance and there's a sense of like we know everything, we're the best kind of thing, right? And then when you have Filipino Americans, it's like layers, right? And then you're attacking your own people because of the things that you're lacking. It's like because of your insecurity about who you are, right? So let me just fight this other Pinay because I'm insecure about me being Pinay. And that's such a diasporic experience.
And
And I
deep.
think that people just need to just like let's look at the value of like the panel that Culture Aid just did recently that I was a part of as well. We were talking about the Filipino value of pakikisama and pakikiusap, right?
Mhm.
So just being with each other and talking with each other. It's like we're not each other's enemy. We're all oppressed and marginalized, especially, you know, being immigrants in North America. Like it's a different kind of thing. So we don't have to fight each other. And this happens with the African American community, you know, like Audre Lorde totally talked about it. And so it's like let's just talk to each other and remember that we're all humans who are part of the same community, right? We're in it together, and there's no point in like battling each other for Instagram clout or for whatever reason people do it for, you know.
I think that you know people sometimes, well, within the Filipino community in the diaspora, is like they're trying to grab some kind of piece of their identity from
Mhm.
some way. So whether you're trying to express it in your collection, maybe they're trying to express it about, you know, well, I know I have like 5% Ifugao blood, so I have the right to tell you that XYZ. But I think I can interpret this. I'm not the psychologist, but I interpret this as um, people are trying to find something to be proud of and relate to the culture in some way, some form, and it just comes off on different levels, you know. And I think that's kind of what most of the Filipino culture is hungry for. I mean, I've heard the word shame several times now in our conversation, and it's kind of a negative word. It has a very low vibration, and I think that we should turn that into pride. I think what we have to look for is what can we be proud of as individuals, as business owners, as members of the community, where we can be make something, create something, and be proud of it, and then whoever we're selling it to in the community, or you know, they can be proud to buy it, proud to wear it. Like turn that shame into pride. You know, I think that's what we have to look for in our passions.
To reshift it.
Mhm.
Anya or Jess, I didn't know if you wanted to chime in as well.
think Anya's frozen.
Oh no.
Well, well, I guess I can add something. I mean, I personally have not experienced having other Filipinas sort of have a negative sort of reaction to the way that I sort of portray Philippine culture or anything like that. But I'm sure it's because I also come from a very different background, being in the Philippines and living here, and also being German and not actually living in Germany. I feel like if I had lived in Germany, it would feel a bit different for me as well. But I guess in some of my experiences, like with my family in Germany, sometimes they do sort of see the Philippines in sort of a bad light and see like, you know, why do you want to live there? I get that a lot from my dad and some of my family members. They're like, you have a better chance exploring your career abroad or in Europe and things like that. But then I feel like I personally, I guess maybe also because my mom is a very strong personality and she was also very passionate about being Filipino and things like that. So I feel like that sort of I inherited it in some way, and I'm also feel very grateful for it because I don't at all feel ashamed when I'm in Germany or when I'm in Europe about being Filipino at all. And I always defend it as best as I can. But yeah.
Anya, you're back.
Yes. Yay. Okay. Yeah. I think. Yeah. It's been quite sad to hear these things happening, especially this year when we don't need for these things to be happening. But I remember when we first collaborated with Ma Ari. They're a US brand that's all founded by Philippine American women. Um, they were actually warned by their mothers, and their moms told them, "Are you sure you want to work with like a Filipino company, or like are you sure you want to work in the Philippines?" You know, like that concept of crab mentality is so strong among the generations before us, and it's just sad to see that it's still happening right now. You know, we when we were working with them, it was taking a while for us to get their orders done, so they decided to come to the Philippines and brave to go to Mindanao. And so their parents were all very worried. Are you sure you're gonna trust this random stranger Filipino girl to take you to Mindanao? It's not safe, you know. And you know, they were very cautious working with us because of all this, I guess, negative perception, that narrative from the generations before them, telling them that, you know, this is how it is in the Philippines. You know, ang daming nanggugoyo, or you're gonna get swindled or something. Or so, but you know, I appreciate so much their genuine intention for coming and for proving that that's not true, right? I think we all should give, you know, each other the benefit of the doubt and see more the goodness in the person versus being critical, be more compassionate. I don't think it's going to do any good to anyone to always be in a competitive state. I always feel like it's such a joy for me, genuinely, to see that there's so many brands popping left and right using our local textiles, because that's really the point of it all, right? The point of it all is to bring our Philippine textiles in the global map. The point is to really revive our weaving industry. I was so thrilled when Carol decided to leave her life in the US to come here and bring so much freshness into the design and really elevate the value of our weaves. We need more designers like this. I think the Filipina X community should understand that we are all part of the ecosystem. You know, you can't just simply separate one from the other. We're all connected. We're all interconnected. Anna Marie in the entrepreneurship page talked about kapwa, and Caroline talked about pakikipag isa. These are values that we should anchor ourselves on, not crab mentality, not not that, because that's not us. That's a product of colonial mentality. That's something that was you know, ingrained in our minds, but that's not our truth. That's not really who we are. We're here to celebrate what it means to be Filipino, what bayanihan means. These are our origin values. You know, I think it's very important that we understand history and we peel off the layers that really does not define who we are as Filipinos, and instead focus on what can nurture our connections deeper there. So like now, Maari, they're like family, you know, they come here with so much confidence, whether or not I take them to South Cotabato, to Bukidnon, anywhere, we have established that trust. And when they go back to the US, they change the narrative. They tell the story that this is not what we do. We're all about sisterhood here, you know. So there.
I'm going to take opportunity to say one thing. While I have you really powerful women here that can make a difference. Sometimes when you understand that there's other powers out there that can be negative to your passions, maybe that's a way that we can unite instead of be divided. So one of the things that I wanted to share with the design community here is and I was going to throw them out the other day, and I said, no, I need to keep them. I have a bunch of swatches of textiles that I've collected in China. And a lot of them are very similar to indigenous textiles and very similar to some of our specific indigenous textiles that I'm surprised that they have. Okay, I just wanted to let people know, you know, here, makers, and also, you know, I'm going to be meeting with DTI about that, is, you know, China is, you know, reproducing, because you always have to have new stuff, right? So China is reproducing some things that are very similar to that we can only do on a loom here. But somehow they've figured out how to do it with machines. And I have I have lots of swatches. And China also invites some of the members of the weaving community to have them come and show at their show. And this is interesting. I told this story before to Anne-Marie, and also I think Caroline, maybe you read. Yeah. So you know, I was working with one of the considered cultural masters in the north, in the Ifugao, and she did, you know, I was working with her on a project sponsored with, you know, by DTI, and she disappears for 4 days, and I'm like, where did you go? We were working on something, and she goes, oh ma'am, I went to China. And I said, what did you do in China? She says, oh, this company invited me that I could sell my textiles there. And I said, so did you sell anything? And she goes, no. And I go, please don't do that again, because they now have all of your textiles. They have a sampling of everything you've developed. And what they're going to do is try to make the same thing and offer it now to the world made by machine. So there are things like this that are going on that, you know, our communities aren't even aware of. She just felt like, well, shoot, I got a free trip to Hong Kong to show my stuff. I didn't sell anything, but a few things, you know, just to whatever. So when you think about something like that your inspiration, your hard work of the nanais that have put this together for generations, it's already being commercialized in China and being put into shoes made by Steve Madden, you know, and it's being commercialized, and the communities aren't benefiting from it at all. That should all tell us to work harder and work closer as a community, as makers, as business owners. And somehow, you know, you have to tell this story in your marketing so that your final consumers can understand. I'm not saying this specific story, but I'm saying make your story richer about where these products come from and how they came to be and what stories and what inspiration, you know, happened for these stories, for these actual textiles to be born in wherever they're from throughout the Philippines. You know, we have to tell this story somehow. And, you know, other people, other companies like in China and you know, brands like fast fashion brands like Steve Madden, are already taking advantage of this, and we're not even aware. So I want to bring this awareness because I've been in it. I've done it. I've seen it. I have the swatches and I've seen products made. They don't know. They're not saying, oh, this is made, by a tribe in a goose sign. They're not saying that, but they're just inspired by the beauty of this textile that we never got a chance to market and produce and make in our stuff and market within our own community or brand as Philippines. So we have to work harder to protect that together as a community.
You actually bring me to the last question that I'm hoping we have time to put in there too. I'm just being sensitive to time. So I know that some of you might have to leave. So maybe Anya, if you can, maybe what you're going to say ties into the last question. We can see if it works that way too. What would you like to impart? Because Carol, you kind of brought us there already.
Sure.
What would you like to impart to entrepreneurs that are up and coming, that are looking to maybe work with communities in the Philippines or are already working with communities in the Philippines, including like indigenous communities? What kind of words of wisdom would you like to embark on entrepreneurs who are, maybe pursuing some similar kinds of endeavors to what you've pursued? Anya, I don't know what you're going to say would tie into that.
Definitely, it definitely ties into this. I was just going to say that, Carol is right. We have to work collectively to protect our textile culture and our weaving industry. And she's right to say that we have to be very careful in how we source our fabrics and make sure that we all do our part in where our fabrics are made from. When you go to Green Hills, there's so many piña fabrics that are machine made, and sometimes if you're not like a textile expert, you can't tell the difference, and it's eating out the livelihood of the weavers in Aklan, the piña weavers in Aklan. I think for Filipina X and entrepreneurs who are seeking out to work with different indigenous communities, the first thing that I would say is it's very important that you invest in time and presence. Anthill has spent 5 years on the ground building relationship and trust with the communities. These things don't happen overnight. And it takes a while to be able to cut across or overcome barriers of trauma that is so deeply evident in even more in the grassroots communities. It's not really talked about. So make sure that you kind of don't also pressure yourself into coming up with the product or launching your brand right away. That we also take the time to really acknowledge that as part of our entrepreneurial journey, we have to invest time and presence with our primary stakeholder. Second is, I think, the clarity of intention and why you really want to be able to work with these communities, because it always comes through. The communities are already vulnerable as a minority, and they really would want, they're very accommodating. They welcome different sorts of visitors, guests and collaborators, designers who want to work with them because it gives them a sense of hope. But I think it's very important that we're able to really check in within ourselves also why we want to do that. What's our long-term goal? What's our short-term goal? What's our intention? Really anchor ourselves in our values and in the purpose of why we do what we do. And third, I think this is based also from the mistakes we've learned in the past, is you have to be very, very conscious in your language and in your vocabulary, because a lot of the indigenous communities, your language is very powerful, and in the dialogue, in the conversations that we have with our partners, you have to emphasize on really defining the relationship, that they are partners, they are co-designers. they are collaborators. They're not just merely suppliers. They're not just weavers, you know, they're not just there to kind of help you grow your business, that they're part of the business, and really ensure that there's participatory communication in the way you also engage this dialogue. And last is also challenge your customers to be critical of your work. Encourage your customers to make you accountable for what you do, because I think that really, the transparency supports everyone that's involved in your business. I think as entrepreneurs, it will keep us grounded if we have a community of customers who constantly does check and balance in the way we do our work. And I think it's very important that they constantly also challenge us to be true to what we commit our brands to do. So I think that's it for me.
Thank you. I don't know if Caroline or Jess, if you wanted to chime in. It's just what would you like to embark on upcoming entrepreneurs who are wanting to maybe look at promoting the culture, working with communities, including Indigenous communities? What would be just words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
From my perspective, as an entrepreneur, I didn't have the time or the resources to do what Anya was saying. But then it's like, Anya exists, Anthill exists. You know, you work with these established, amazing companies in the Philippines that are doing this kind of work. The Manila Collectible Company, Marlon Martin with Ifugao Nation Arts and Crafts, and you know, they're around and they're all connected. They all actually know each other. So it's like you come in and you just learn from them. Like Manila Collectible Company is in Manila and they have education, kind of, they have workshops, so you can learn that way. And so for someone who's just like coming in, they don't speak the language, they don't have the resources to travel all over the Philippines, that's like, you get into with one person that's doing this kind of advocacy work and doing really great things within different communities all over the Philippines, you're gonna find out that you're gonna know them all eventually, you know? And that's already, it's like plug and play, you know? Like, I love that you guys all are doing the work there, and we can just come in and like really just learn from all the work that you've already done. So yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for staying a little bit longer and diving into the conversation. You know, you talked about healing, and I feel like maybe I'm overreaching here, but your work is part of your healing process too. And in doing the work that you do, you're giving to folks like me who've, you know, grown up in the United States. You're giving me an opportunity to heal. I remember, Anya, you said wearing that textile is like wearing a second skin, and how the healing piece of just putting on that garment, knowing like my people made that. To me, it's a very powerful experience. I feel it right here, just saying that. So I thank you so much for letting me be a part of this panel. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. Maybe it contributes to each of our healing too. And as others witness this conversation, that it can help them with theirs also. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much.
You.
Bye, Pinsan.
Bye.
Thank you.